Our first speaker this morning is Sarah Levin. She is part of the Secular Coalition of America. She actually heads up their state chapters program, which there's a Secular Coalition chapter in every state. She recently launched a program called Put Kids First, which is designed to combat the exemptions that people are trying to get to not get their kids vaccinated. So that's a very important program. She's going to talk a little bit today about the political power that we can really harness in our community. She's going to help us understand how to take care of that. So please welcome Sarah to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you all for coming out again on a weekend. My name is Sarah Levin. I'm the Legislative Associate at the Secular Coalition for America, where I oversee our 50-state chapter program. And I'll go a little bit into what that is a little bit later. If you've never heard of the Secular Coalition before, we are your secular lobbyists in Washington. We were founded with the purpose of giving secular Americans a voice in government. We advocate for a separation of church and state and work to bring visibility and respect to non-theistic and secular Americans at the federal and the state level. I have the amazing job of empowering people to become constituent lobbyists in their respective states, advocating for secular values and making the voices of their communities heard in state legislatures and local government. Oh, here's a clicker. Awesome. Okay. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. I like to talk with my hands, so this is great. We are at a critical turning point in our movement, where we are growing at a rapid pace and are just starting to recognize ourselves and each other as part of one community. Despite the fact that we have such a wide range of identities, atheists, agnostics, rights, ethical culturalists, humanists, freethinkers, skeptics, and others, the incredible thing is that we all share a basic set of values, secular values. We can all agree that our laws should be evidence and science-based and religiously neutral. We can all agree that there should be absolute separation of church and state as guaranteed by the First Amendment of our Constitution. While not all of us necessarily identify as humanists, some may prefer to be called an atheist or agnostic or something else, the very core concept of humanism, doing good for goodness sake, without any desire for reward in the hereafter, like we're going to be doing this Sunday with Atheists Fighting Hunger. And just because we feel this innate responsibility to make this one life really count and to leave the world better than when we left it. These are universal secular values. Our community has a vision of what secular governance looks like. In fact, the Secular Coalition worked with our member organizations to put together our Model Secular Policy Guide. Right here, you might have seen it on the table. And we distributed this to all the congressional offices on the Hill. And it details every single issue that we advocate on and what our specific policy recommendations are. And this was meant to be a guide for legislators to see what the secular community is all about and what we stand for. And I really would like everybody to take a copy, and if we run out, I'd be happy to ship you a box of them. I definitely want those to be widely distributed. So before I go into exactly how we can make some impact on these issues, I want to go a little bit into what these issues are. So health and safety. The health and safety of all Americans is at risk when religious beliefs are valued above human lives. Issues that we lobby on include pharmacists denying emergency contraception. They call this religious refusal, so pharmacists can just decide, well, I don't really like what you're getting a prescription for, so I'm just not going to fill it for you. Death with dignity, conscious clause exemptions for doctors and pharmacists, religious and personal belief exemptions for vaccinations, employers exempted from the contraception mandate, faith healing, child care inspection exemptions, and blocking stem cell research. Education. Our secular public education system is at risk as a result of religious influence on curriculum. One example, in Texas now, Moses is part of U.S. history in Texas textbooks. as well as students and taxpayer money going directly to religious schools. We fought this in with our New York chapter, where they were really pushing for school vouchers, which essentially funnel public money to private religious schools, which are not held at all to the same standards that secular public schools are. So they can teach creationism, they can discriminate against their own students, and yet they're still getting taxpayer dollars. So we did successfully beat that bill in New York. Yeah. Secular activism. Blocking the formation, fighting the blocking of formation of secular student groups. Also, our New York chapter was involved in that. A student contacted us and said, hey, my school won't let me start a student group, and so he contacted a variety of organizations, and our state chapter wrote a personal letter on behalf of Secular Coalition for New York to their principal and all the school administrators, and along with working with our member orgs, they backed off and are now allowing the student to start the group. Fighting religiously motivated bullying in schools, disappearing evolution and secular science curriculum, accurate U.S. history education, medically and scientifically accurate sex education, appropriate use of religious texts in education. So, you know, you can use the Bible as a piece of literature, not necessarily reading it out loud to proselytize your students, for example. Prayer in the classroom and a theistically based Pledge of Allegiance. Military. The U.S. military rewards religious practices and does not provide equal support to all service members. Issues we lobby on include military chaplains, promotion of religion, especially by superiors, and discrimination against non-theists. And I'll just take a second to talk about military chaplains because we've been working very closely with one of our member organizations, the American Humanist Association, on this issue. When you're in the military and they have chaplains, right? And the difference between a chaplain and a psychiatrist is that when you visit a chaplain, it's 100% confidential, and nothing you say can be reported to a superior. That's not the case with a psychiatrist. The only people who don't have any chaplain to represent them are humanists, which make up a significant amount of the military. So they have nowhere to go except a psychiatrist, which is not equal treatment. So that's something we've been fighting with the American Humanist Association, is to get humanist chaplains in the military. Discrimination. Religion is never an excuse to discriminate. Our No Hate, No Exceptions campaign calls on the government not to allow people to violate non-discrimination laws using their personal beliefs as an excuse. Issues we lobby on include faith-based initiatives, taxpayer money funding the Boy Scouts, and I'll actually spend some time on faith-based initiatives. What I mean by that is the government gives grants to religious organizations to provide certain services. The problem with those initiatives, first of all, they have little to no oversight whatsoever, and those organizations can discriminate while they provide those services. So that's public money, taxpayer money, going to religious organizations to provide services that are supposed to be for everybody, but allowing those organizations to discriminate while doing so. And then taxpayer money funding the Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts still explicitly do not accept atheist boys into the Scouts. And we're actually working on fighting a bill in Michigan that's looking to give them additional privileges as well. Exemptions from employment discrimination laws, ministerial exceptions, exemptions from housing discrimination laws, I can cross same-sex marriage off the list, and grants to religious charities who proselytize. Government actions. When government officials engage in religious ceremonies or display religious symbols, they are endorsing religion and therefore violating the Establishment Clause. Issues we lobby on include displays of In God We Trust, the National Day of Prayer, and getting proclamations every year for the National Day of Reason, oaths of office ending with So Help Me God, Pledge of Allegiance, Congressional Prayer Caucus, and legislative prayer. Tax policy. The tax code has multiple privileges written in for churches and religious organizations. Issues we lobby on include income tax exemptions, property tax exemptions, parsonage exemptions, and exemptions from filing financial disclosures. I do want to take a second on that one. So every nonprofit, except religious nonprofits, have to file a form to the IRS called the Form 990, which basically provides some very basic transparency of how they are spending their money. Religious nonprofits are the only ones that don't have to file that form. So we have no idea how they're using their money. We're not even talking about getting rid of the of the benefit altogether, just basic transparency they are not accountable for. And then finally, global. Even abroad, US government funds, policies, or actions should not endorse religion. Some issues we lobby on include the global gag rule, climate change, and blasphemy laws. Okay, so I've talked about some of the issues that we lobby on. How can we make an impact? When it comes to gaining political influence as a movement, the good news is the numbers are on our side. In May of this year, Pew Research Center released its Religious Landscape Survey, revealing that nearly 23% of Americans identify as religiously unaffiliated. 3.1% of those surveyed identified as atheists and 4% identified as agnostic. The last time they did this survey, 7 years prior, the number of religiously unaffiliated was just over 16%. That's a huge, huge jump, and it's only continuing to grow. And if you look at the breakdown, all these things that people used to say about, oh, well, you just get more religious with age and things like that, that's not true. They found out that people who are unaffiliated or atheists tend to stay that way. So you betcha that they're scared of these numbers. With numbers like these, we have the potential to have a practically unbeatable advantage in grassroots advocacy over some of the most well-known and influential lobby groups in DC. For example, the notorious religious right organization, the Family Research Council. According to Right Wing Watch, the Family Research Council has approximately 455,000 members. Another well-known and very influential lobby group, and I'm not taking a position on guns at all, I'm just using this to compare the numbers. The National Rifle Association claims to have 4.5 million members. There are nearly 56 million Americans who are non-theistic and religiously unaffiliated. That just blows those numbers completely out of the water. If even a fraction of that number was organized into an active, engaged political constituency, there would be sea change, a total sea change from the kind of policies that we're seeing now. So, if there's so many of us, why don't we have more political influence? We can get really excited about these numbers, but then we look at the policies that we're seeing, the laws that are being introduced and passed, and we wonder what's going on. My answer to this is the tragedy of the silent majority. The inherent advantage that the religious right has is that their followers are very ideologically polarized. And people who are ideologically polarized are very, very easy to activate. It's very easy to get them to pack a room for a hearing when there's a bill up. It's very easy to get them to make a ton of phone calls to a legislator's office. Very easy to get them to send a bunch of emails. They're very, very impassioned. And that's just a natural advantage that they have. We are not ideologically polarized because we're free thinkers. But, as I mentioned before, there are a number of issues that we can all agree on because they reflect our secular values. So, even if we don't want to be cynics and imagine that there are legislators who have the absolute best intentions of representing their constituents, even they do have to think about the next election, right? They do want to keep their seats. And if we want to be cynics, we can say maybe that's all they care about. But at the end of the day, politicians are thinking about the next election. So what that means is they actually do really care what their constituents think because they want to know that they can keep their seat in the next election. But they care about the constituents that they think are going to show up on election day. And there's a big difference between just their general constituents and the ones that vote. And so when they see a hearing on a bill packed with a bunch of people, that's a signaler to them. These are the people that are showing up on election day. When they get in-person meetings from their constituents, these are the people showing up on election day. When they get phone calls, when they get emails, these are the people who are paying attention to what I'm doing. And this is what they stand for. So if I do something too far away from what they want, they're going to be pissed off and I'm going to be in trouble. Or if I do what they like, I might just secure my seat. So this is how, knowing this, you can see how a very vocal minority can have a disproportionate amount of influence in government. Because they are very, very loud and they are a signaler to that legislator that you need to pay attention to us because we're going to make you pay if you don't, basically. But this can change. Remember the numbers. And it starts with you. If you've ever found yourself wishing you could do something to advance a particular secular cause, or you're just really frustrated with a bill that's moving that you disagree with, or anything like that, or you see something that just blatantly violates separation of church and state, sign up for action alerts. get involved. There are things that you can do. If you're frustrated or you want to do something, but you haven't taken action, that's the tragedy of the silent majority right there. You have a right, and I would even say responsibility as constituents, to tell your legislators what you think and what you want. It's your right. That's what our representative democracy is all about. So let me take a second to talk about action alerts. You've all probably seen one before. It's basically one of those emails that says, hey, this bill just came up. It's terrible for X, Y, and Z reason. Or it's great for X, Y, and Z reason. You should contact your legislator by clicking this button. Now, if any one of you have taken one of those action alerts, you may have gotten a response from your legislator's office that looked like a form letter. I want to talk about that for a second. Form letters aren't, it doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. It might seem that way. It's like, oh, this is just kind of like an automated response. They don't really care what I think. That's not true. I interned in a Senate office for Senator Tom Udall in New Mexico, and my job as an intern was to field constituent communications. And my job was to look at an email, confirm that it was a constituent, figure out what topic they cared about, check support or oppose, and then funnel that communication to the appropriate staff member who covered that issue. That staff member, if they already had a letter written, because they've gotten tons of letters like this before, they send it out. But they take note, especially when there's a ton of people calling in about a certain issue. Now, if they got a communication about an issue they've never ever heard about before, or that the legislator has never taken a position on, guess what they have to do? They have to go talk to their boss and write a form letter. And if that legislator doesn't have a position, they have to come up with one. Can you imagine how much influence you could have if you're paying attention to your legislators and calling them out, or even proposing bills or things that they can take on? If enough people, if enough constituents are contacting an office on an issue, you can force a legislator to take a position on an issue. That's a huge deal. But if they never hear from you, it's never going to happen. So if you take action and you see that form letter, just know that it's not, you've made a difference. Don't feel like they're not listening to you. And when it comes to really contentious issues, and they're getting tons of phone calls and emails from both sides, sometimes it can even become almost like a tally. Like, okay, we had 50, okay, one more. Because it's a game. They have to take a vote, and they want to take the vote that most of the constituents support. So that's why when you get those action alerts, it is so, so important to fill those out. They don't go into a vacuum. They're really paying attention to those. And honestly, they're very, very easy. You fill out your information, you can even check a box that says remember me, so every time it just takes less than 30 seconds to do. If we ask you to make a phone call, all you have to do is call, say I'm so-and-so, I live here, because again, they need to confirm that you're a constituent. And I support or oppose this bill. You don't even really, most of the time, have to go into why, although it is definitely good to give talking points, which we always offer when we send out these action alerts. But again, it's just somebody there sitting and saying, okay, constituent from here, opposes support, good. And that takes less than a minute to do. It makes a huge, huge impact. Again, remember, we don't want to lose to the vocal minority and fall trapped to the silent majority. Okay, visibility. A little bit behind my slides. Visibility is very, very key. So I've talked to people who are really interested in getting involved, but they're like, you know, my legislator is so conservative and so religious, they're just not going to listen to me. They don't care what I think. And that is absolutely not true. They might disagree with you, but if they don't even know that you exist as a secular constituent, they're definitely never gonna do anything. You have to let them know that you exist. Lobbying and advocacy is a long game. It's relationship building. You have to make yourself known. You have to let them know what you stand for. And then a lot of things, yeah, maybe your legislator, your very conservative religious legislator, won't necessarily vote the way you want all the time, won't introduce the bill you want, but there are things that happen behind the scenes where your influence can take place that you don't know about. For example, if you have a conservative legislator, they hear from their secular constituents all the time, they know where they stand, they disagree with them, but they hear from them all the time, so they know that they're watching them, right? So a religious right group comes in and says, we want to introduce this, we want you to add more restrictions to abortion, or we want you to, you know, declare a National Day of Prayer or something like that. We want you to do this. They might say, you know, I helped you guys out a few months ago with this bill. I'm really not looking, you know, my election is coming up pretty soon. I really don't want any headaches for my secular constituents, and I know that they're going to turn out if I do this. I really don't want to touch this issue right now. Or they might, there might be a bad bill, but there are always amendments that are proposed that would make them even worse. They might say, okay, I'm gonna vote down this amendment. That's a big deal. That's changing the laws and how they look, or preventing even worse laws from coming out. But you're not gonna see that, and they're not gonna call you up and tell you. But just know that that's the kind of stuff that happens behind the scenes, even in those offices. But again, unless they know who you are, and they hear from you on a regular basis, and they know where you stand, we can't get there. They have to know that they have secular constituents. Visibility is so, so important. So now I'm going to go into a few specific things that you can do. So again, as individuals, please sign up for Action Alerts. Our table, we're going to be tabling all weekend. I'll be here with my partner in crime and co-worker, Austin, Director of Operations of the Secular Coalition. And we have an Action Alert sign-up list, so please sign up. You can, as far as visibility, so I've talked a lot about talking to legislators, but I do also think it's important to have visibility in the public eye. So if there's conversations happening about secular issues in your state, if the major newspaper in your state comes out with an editorial on an issue, write a letter to the editor, especially if you think that the secular perspective has not been included. If there's, and even on an issue, say it's access to contraception or sex ed, you know, maybe Planned Parenthood has come out with, you know, is very visible with their point of view. But we agree with Planned Parenthood, but we have a different angle, and it's an important angle: science and evidence-based policy. You know, we can all agree that women's autonomy is really important, but that's the language of Planned Parenthood. The language of the secular community is all policies should be evidence-based and science-based, and that's an angle that we should bring to the table. Because it really, for us, it cuts to the root of so many issues, and we need to have that language out there. So write a letter to the editor, write an op-ed, so we can get the voice of what secular people think about this, what our angle is, why this isn't, why choice, why non-discrimination, why all these issues I mentioned are secular issues. If you're a secular leader, if you organize a group, even if it's just a tiny meetup group, or if it's a big one, you're in a really great position to help with our state chapters. So, first of all, let me go into our state chapters a little bit, and I will say Brian and Scott are absolute superstars. They are, you know, they put this conference together, but they also happen to be our state chapter leaders for Secular Coalition for Pennsylvania, and they've done an amazing job, and they have done a great job of cultivating relationships with state legislators. And so if you want to get involved, you can talk to them. So our state chapters have monthly conference calls, and a lot of times we don't have a central meeting place, so you could be from anywhere in the state. As long as you're a registered voter in the state, you can get involved. So what we do with our chapters is they're basically like the mini SCA in every state. So their job is to advocate for secular issues to their state legislatures. You can, if you're a state chapter leader, they help me write the action alerts that you actually see. They write letters to the editor, they do all of these things on behalf of the chapter, and they help build relationships with the state legislators. But again, action alerts don't really do anything if people aren't doing them. If Brian or Scott goes in to talk to a legislator and says, hey, this issue really has the backing of the secular community, but we can't back that up with phone calls and emails, or if we can't tell him, well, you have this many constituents in your district to identify as secular, then, you know, we don't really have that much credibility. So what you can do if you're a secular leader, if you're a local one where everyone kind of lives in the same place, just take stock of how many people are in your membership, and let Brian and Scott know, hey, we have X amount of members who are constituents in this district, here's our legislator. We can take that information when we go lobbying. If you're a big group that has people from all over the state, do a poll and ask people, hey, we're trying to figure out where our constituents are. Just give me, generally if you just have the full zip code with those last 4 digits, you can figure it out. So if you just get all that information and say, okay, we have this many constituents in this district, here's our legislator. We have this many here, we have this many here, and give us that information. That's very, very helpful. Another thing you can do if you're a secular organizer is to be a liaison to your group, is to come onto our monthly conference call. So you don't have to, I understand if you're an organizer, you have plenty on your plate. We're not asking you to do anything except show up on the call and listen to what we're doing, contribute, and just be that basic liaison to your group, to the state chapter. Because again, this is the core of grassroots advocacy. I can call your legislators until I'm blue in the face, but they really don't care what I think. They care about what their constituents think. So there has to be a seamless process between the grassroots, the people on the ground, people like you, and the people like Brian and Scott who are calling these offices and figuring out the strategy and making sure that when they talk to legislators, they're backed up by their own community. Also, if you have friends who are, if maybe you're not a very political person, if you have any friends who are like, oh man, I really want to get involved in political advocacy, please direct them to the state chapters. That would be awesome too. Also, the Secular Coalition has endorsing organizations. It's totally free. This actually helps us a lot on the Hill because we can say we represent X amount of groups, secular groups in the country. So if you are a leader of a secular group and you are not signed up, you can go to our website, about and then endorsing orgs, and sign up to be an endorsing organization. And then, sorry, this is a little bit back when I was talking about visibility, but I do want to make this point. Visibility is very important, but it's positive visibility is even more important. We want to talk about, if you're in a meeting with your legislator, that conservative religious one, right? You can disagree very, very strongly with them about all the issues, but make sure to be very, very nice, very, very polite. Be the nicest atheist, because you might be the only atheist they've ever met, because whether or not we like it, that happens a lot, that people unfortunately aren't always open about who they are. So when they are, the person might say, oh, you're the first atheist I've ever met, which it totally isn't true, which is totally. But that means that without us really wanting to, we're kind of ambassadors of the entire community, like all the time. So that means we have to be really, really nice and polite, even to the most crazy religious right people, especially when we're meeting with legislators. And this goes for anybody you interact with, with outside organization, with allies, with everyday people, but especially legislators. Because, then after that meeting, you'll say, hey, I disagreed with everything they said, but they were so nice. They were so polite. So I do also want to talk a little bit about community, and I think that I loved Chris Johnson's documentary yesterday because it talked about all the things that our communities do and offer that religious institutions typically offer, but we are starting to build those communities. We are building secular alternatives to religious institutions. I think that it's, when it comes to political influence, all of that is based on existing communities, right? So the state chapters, they're not socially focused. Our only point is to gather the existing community and just harness the voice into a political voice, right? To amplify our issues. But in order to do that, we need to have a strong community in the first place, right? So all of you here, I'm sure, are involved with different things, but just be aware of all the many, many ways that you can participate outside of maybe just attending your monthly meetings and things like that. There are a lot of ways that you can help be a part of growing the secular community to the point, and it's already happening, but there are ways that we can really contribute. Things like, if you have a child and you want to send them to summer camp, you should totally send them to Camp Quest. Yeah. If you have a kid, yeah, Camp Quest is awesome. If you have a student in high school or college, encourage them to join or start a Secular Student Alliance group. Yeah. Yeah. If they were part of a Secular Student Alliance group and they graduated and they moved somewhere, encourage them to see if there's any humanist, atheist, local groups they can get involved with or start one. There are a lot of organizations that are more, the Sunday Assembly type, ethical culture. I know there's the Philadelphia Ethical Society, Unitarian Universalist Humanists. If you've never been to one, just try it. Go visit, meet other people. It's very important for us to start, recognizing, even though we're free thinkers, that doesn't mean we can't be part of the kind of communities that religious institutions have. And the more that we do that, the more we have that solid base of community that we can gather and turn that into a grassroots presence. So I think community is just as important. So I'm sure all of you are already involved, but I just wanted to mention those ways that you can get even more involved and help build those secular alternatives. And then a few extra ideas for things you can do if you're kind of thinking, okay, what can I do when I get home, kind of thing. If you're part of a group, think about inviting your state legislator or your local council member to an event. That might seem a little crazy, but actually they love talking to constituents. Think again, they want to know that they can keep their seat, right? So they love opportunities to talk to constituents in a way that makes them look really great. So if you want to put together an event and invite a legislator, that's a really great way of building your visibility, building your influence, and getting involved in political advocacy. And it's kind of cool to meet your legislator and get some FaceTime with them. And that's actually a lot easier than you would think with state and local representatives. It's a lot harder to get FaceTime with people from Congress, but you'd be surprised, especially when it comes to local council members. Again, thinking about the turnout for their elections is very, very low. I mean, generally our turnout for elections in the states is very low compared to other countries outside of presidential elections. So the more local you get, the more they're like actually starving for attention. So consider maybe inviting your local council member to your event. How am I doing on time? Okay. Glad I asked. Really glad I asked. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit into Put Kids First. So Put Kids First is a new initiative to eliminate non-medical vaccine exemptions state by state. So in all states but 3, California as of this summer, and then West Virginia and Mississippi, very surprising. They have religious exemptions and or philosophical or personal belief exemptions for vaccines. So what this means is you can say, I don't believe in the science behind vaccines for X and Y, whatever reason. So I'm gonna opt out and send my unvaccinated child to school. The problem with that is that there are people and children with medical reasons why they can't be vaccinated. They might be too young, they might have a certain allergy, they might have an immunodeficiency, and they depend on everybody around them to be vaccinated not to get sick. The number of people who are using these exemptions has increased in recent years, unfortunately, and what's happening is we're starting to see outbreaks of things like measles and whooping cough in numbers that we haven't seen for a very long time. These were almost completely eradicated diseases, and now they're coming back. And this is the kind of thing you really want to nip in the bud, because the last thing you want is to start when there's already an epidemic. For us, this is both a church-state separation issue and an issue of evidence and science-based policies. Vaccines work. The science is clear. And this is one of those issues where that line of exercising your beliefs, if it harms other people in the process, you can't do that. It's the same thing with discrimination. You can't just say, I should be allowed to discriminate against whoever I want just because. No, the line of religious liberty and personal belief ends where you harm others, especially when it comes to children. So this is a new initiative. Our California chapter was actually part of Vaccinate California, which got their bill passed this summer that eliminated all non-medical exemptions. And we selected 10 campaign states to try to replicate that success. Pennsylvania is one of them. If any of you out there are interested in this issue, especially if you're a parent, if you're a medical professional, or if you happen to have an immunodeficiency or a medical reason why you can't be vaccinated, I would love to hear from you. We have vaccine pledge cards you can fill out that help us kind of collect the information so that in January when we start lobbying, because most of the state legislatures are out of session right now, we can contact you and bring you into those meetings with legislators, just like I was talking about, bringing those compelling stories of, I'm a parent, I'm a medical professional, I care about this issue, and I'm a secular constituent, and this is why you should vote this way. So please come talk to me at the table if you're interested in working this issue, because we really want to make this happen in Pennsylvania. I know I'm running out of time. I wanted to just summarize, because this whole thing was about political influence, right? It's about taking action. So I want to make sure that you guys have in mind some very specific actions that you can take to really make this happen. Stop by the table, sign up for action alerts, grab a model secular policy guide, fill out a vaccine pledge card. You can also become a member. I will really quickly say we are a nonprofit. We have a full-time staff of, I think, 5 people now. And we do a lot of really great work, but we survive entirely on donations. So if you're able to, it would be great if you could give a gift or become a member of the Secular Coalition. If you're an organizer, or if you're just a very active member of your group, please, it would be great if you could start a conversation about dedicating a liaison to your group, to our state chapters, so that we can get that really seamless process of grassroots to grass tops happening. And follow the Secular Coalition on social media and promote our action alerts in particular. I am here all weekend. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about how you can get involved, about the issues themselves, about Who Kids First. We are here to serve you and amplify your voice. I just want to thank you all for having me today. Go out there and flex that political muscle.
We're gonna do like a 5-minute Q&A.
Do you have a list available of your natural allies?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I just shouldn't do PowerPoints because I just don't pay attention to them. Natural allies is actually a term I use for groups that have common ground with us on certain issues. So I'm talking about, for example, LGBT groups, reproductive rights groups, science organizations, professional associations of scientists. You know, I'm trying to think what else. Basically, I think of them by issue area for the most part. You know, any kind of civil rights group that has a common issue with us, and that's why the Secular Policy Guide is a really good start for that. Getting a lay of the land of your local groups that work on the same issues that you do, those are your natural allies. So the ones that work on the same issues that we do. And I mentioned before that we have a different angle to those issues. And what ends up happening a lot of times is unfortunately we advocate on an issue, and then an ally, like say if we're fighting an anti-choice bill, or they're trying to cut funding for sex ed, you know, Planned Parenthood might be doing, and we do work with those groups at the national level, but on the state level, we'll be sending out an action alert, but then we see that another advocacy group is doing that too, and we're not doing anything together. So reaching out to those, first getting that short list of groups, okay, what are all the issues that we care about in our state, and what groups that are already out there are talking about this, who are working on those issues too. And then reaching out to them and say, hey, we are, you know, we're representatives from the Free Thought Society, and we want to work on, just an example, not to call you out, but, we want to work on this issue. We see that you're doing it too. Can we work together? Or actually, what I would say, instead of can we work together, say, what can we do to help? Because when it comes to relationship building with allies, you know, unfortunately, we do have to recognize the stigmas attached with secular and atheists and all that kind of stuff, and you want to make a really good impression so that they, you know, you can slowly break down those stereotypes, because they'll be like, what are you all about? Why is Secular Coalition for Pennsylvania doing this? You know, I don't understand. So that's actually a great opportunity to explain why their issue is a secular issue. And I recommend kind of giving and giving and giving until you get back. So ask them how you can help in their efforts. Especially if it's, you know, if it's their issue, you know, if you're talking about a reproductive rights issue and their reproductive rights group, and that's all they do, then I recommend reaching out to them and say, we really want to help in any way we can. This is why, because this is a secular issue for us. And then over time, they might include you in their strategy calls. They might, you know, include you in meetings that they're having with legislators in the long run. But first you have to demonstrate that you're really there for them, and kind of build that trust up. That was probably a little more than you were looking for, but by natural allies, I meant groups that have common ground issues with us. No other questions? Come on, guys. Yeah.
The issues are easier to start with like vaccination. It's easier to approach and get a smaller win.
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I think the vaccine issue is great because it's a winnable win. It's something that has broad public support, so we don't have to do the work of, you know, educating the public and getting them to agree with us, because they already do. And it's an issue that is can bring in a lot of different parts of the population. It's something everybody agrees on. Everybody agrees that we should protect children. Everybody agrees that we don't want an epidemic. You know, I would say that it's one of the easier issues, and that we should that it's a good strategy to start with those issues, to start with issues that have broad public support and that give us an opportunity to work with groups that we wouldn't otherwise work with necessarily. Although in this issue, I mean, we have a ton of health issues that we work on, but working on the Put Kids First campaign is an opportunity to reach out to doctors, which probably would be helpful because they're probably interested in other health issues that you can work on with them later. It's an opportunity for you to connect with families and parents, and it's an opportunity for you just to work with a lot of different groups that you wouldn't necessarily bring in. And that's very powerful when you can get a coalition together of a wide variety of groups and people. That way it's not just Secular Coalition for Pennsylvania wants this, but Secular Coalition for Pennsylvania and the School Nurse Association of Pennsylvania and the American Academy of Pediatrics chapter of Pennsylvania and this parent advocacy group or this just, informal group of parents. All of these people are asking you to please pass this bill. That's a very, very powerful thing. The more coalition, the more issues that you lobby on, that you can bring in coalition partners from a wide swath of advocacy groups and interest groups and people, the more, I think, the stronger your message is. And it's a great opportunity for us to show, and I'll echo the documentary we saw yesterday, it shows what we stand for, not just what we stand against, or not what we don't believe in, sorry, I misspoke. But I would recommend, and that's why I love this campaign. I would really like people to get involved because it is something we can win on, and we actually already did in California. And let me tell you, if we can win on vaccines in California, we can do it anywhere.
Separation of church and state issues, a lot of great organizations are working on that, Secular Coalition, Americans United, FFRF. And it always seems like people who are fighting those things come off as are being portrayed as bullies. And there's got to be, I know you talk about presentation and being nice and respect and things like that, but is there any particular strategies to be able to work on those issues effectively without being classified and labeled some kind of bully? There's got to be another way to come at those that, like you said, can establish common ground instead of just, we don't want you to be able to do that anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's a great question. And it's not easy to answer because I do think that there is a small element of just stigma, but people thinking that we are by nature anti-theists, which isn't necessarily true. But I think a lot of that can be combated with the right messaging, and also, again, choosing our battles, choosing the right issues that have broad public support. I'll say, like, we do work on issues like removing monuments from, the state religious monuments from state capitol grounds, or, talking about how "In God We Trust" shouldn't be our national motto. But when it comes down to it, if we're going to choose our issues, the ones that aren't just seen as, oh, that's just something the atheist community cares about, but that's something that everybody cares about, that give us an opportunity to talk about why that is a secular issue in the first place, like vaccines, for example. A lot of people, I'd love to explain to people why we're doing that issue, because then they go, oh, okay. But you have to explain to them why this is a science and evidence-based policy issue. And that's a great opportunity to talk about what we stand for. So I think it's partially a strategic thing of shifting toward issues that we know we can win and that have broad public support, that aren't just seen as, they're just mad because they hate God. But I also think a lot of it has to do with messaging, and making sure that we are not, I make sure that our social media platforms, for example, do not have anything that could be even mildly construed as religion bashing, because our job is not to eradicate religion out of the public sphere. Our job is not to disprove God for anybody. And when I talk to my state chapters about the content that we put out there, I spend the time to talk to them about how the content that I don't want on there, because you have to keep in mind that if everyday people goes to the Secular Coalition for Pennsylvania's Facebook page and they see, oh, here's 5 reasons why Jesus doesn't exist, it's a big turnoff, right? We want to be sticking to the issues and talking about them in ways that, using language that have broad appeal. So one thing I try to use a lot is talk about how things affect minority faiths, because I think they're left out of the conversation a lot. So talking about how this impacts all people of all faiths and none, this bill would be discriminatory to minority faiths, to atheists. If you have a list of things, list a bunch of things among atheists so that you can demonstrate that we're not just thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about the impact to other people.
Thank you, Sarah. The Secular Coalition for America